Medieval dark fantasy horror is the answer I'd give you if I was asked which genre to place Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman in. The tagline on the cover of the book says it's an epic tale of medieval horror, but I would say the themes, adventures, and terrors go much deeper and stretch to much more vast expanses than you'd expect, exploring primal horrors that are man-made along with the incomprehensible fears that accompany unknown beings, celestial entities, and abominations from hell itself. The general tone that rides the line between face-melting horrors and almost comically grotesque is what led to me calling this the Dark Souls of books. Everything from the setting, dialogue, and brutality of the world just gave me the same vibes I would get from exploring the early areas in a Dark Souls game. It's not because the book is difficult to read or anything. I mean, the book is kind of long, it clocks in at just about over 400 pages, but it's written so beautifully and flows seamlessly from one horrific scenario to the next that you'll just fly through it. If I were going to call a book the Dark Souls of books because of difficulty, it would probably be House of Leaves, which I still haven't gathered the courage to read. I just haven't felt like doing a college thesis level amount of work just to read a spooky book, and honestly, I probably never will. I'm going to talk about some events and themes from the book Between Two Fires, but I'll try to avoid going into major spoiler territory. Hopefully this discussion will provide just enough context and details to convince you to pick it up and give it a read. The bubonic plague pandemic, which is also known as the Black Death, terrorized the country of France between 1347 and 1352. It reached France from Italy by ship in November of 1347, spreading first through southern France and then continuing outwards towards northern France. At this time, the Kingdom of France had a population of about between 16 to 20 million people, making it the largest population of Europe. France was also relatively urbanized at this point, so there were large groups of people living in close proximity to each other, so when the Black Death hit France, it was catastrophic. And this is the backdrop with which the story takes place. We're introduced to Thomas, who was once a respected knight, but now finds himself wandering the country with a group of bandits. Thomas's fall from grace and how he ended up here is a big driving force in the story, so I won't go into those details too much, but with the plague ravaging France, we're shown how quickly things have become extremely dangerous. Not just because you risk catching the plague just from being around other people, but because starvation is rampant and rule of law has broken down in large areas. Thomas and his crew have been surviving by robbing and killing anyone who crosses their paths, taking anything that's valuable and eating any food they can find. Thomas and his group find a barn with a goat and they decide to kill and eat it. During their meal, they discover a young girl named Delphine. The leader of the group decides he wants to take her for himself, and at this point, Thomas has had enough and turns on the group of bandits he's been traveling with. He kills them all with ease because he's a giant of a man who was once a trained knight. And Delphine is alone and decides she wants to stay with Thomas, who isn't very fond of that idea, but he can't bring himself to leave her alone. Delphine claims that she has the ability to see and talk with angels and tells Thomas that he needs to take her to Paris and that the fate of the world depends on it. In popular media, angels are often portrayed as looking just like regular people, but maybe they glow a little, may or may not have wings, and sometimes they even have a halo. The movie Angels in the Outfield is a classic example of this. And I'm not a religious person, and I'm definitely not a biblical scholar, so take all of this stuff I'm about to say with a grain of salt. As far as I could find, there isn't really a definitive answer in the Bible about whether guardian angels are standard issue or not. Like like most things involving Christianity, there are verses here and there in the Bible that you could point to that argue either way, but for our purposes, we won't worry about those kinds of angels. We'll consider angels at their basic core. Angels are spirit beings created by God to serve Him and to perform His will. In the context of Between Two Fires, the literal devil and hell are waging a war on earth against heaven. So if God were to create angels to serve His will of combating horrific demons, then these angels would also need to be on that same level. That's where you get classic angels like seraphim you see in all those biblically accurate angel threads on Reddit. 6 wings, 2 wings to cover their face, 2 covering their feet, and the remaining 2 are used to fly. Between Two Fires has some of the best and most horrific depictions of angels and demons. Since these angels are biblically accurate, the book does a phenomenal job of describing these entities just enough while leaving the rest to our imagination. Because when it comes down to it, these beings are beyond our comprehension, and a lot of the horror doesn't come from being told what they look like, but from how people feel and react to trying to understand what they're even seeing. I love that even though the angels are supposed to be the good guys, they are still terrifying and often cause as much collateral damage as the demons do. As our heroes travel, they encounter the evils of men and the evils of hell. Demons in this world are downright horrific, brutal, and inflict whatever pain and manipulation they need to in order to achieve their goals. They take full advantage of human desires and weaknesses, and it always plays out in heart-wrenching ways. One of the things I enjoyed most in this story is that, yeah, our heroes often escape by the skin of their teeth, but it's just that. They've barely managed to survive, and are often left scarred either physically or mentally, and oftentimes both. Between Two Fires is definitely in my top 3 books that I've read this year, and most likely in my top 10 and maybe even my top 5 books that I've ever read. If you like the Dark Souls horror aesthetic that's built from an atmosphere of surreal isolation in a fantasy medieval setting riddled with hidden, dangerous dark magic and equally dangerous miracles, then this book is something you should definitely check out. Let me know if you pick up Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman, or if you've read it, let me know if you loved it just as much as I did, or let me know if you didn't like it. That's a perfectly valid opinion as well.